Yeah, good. Good morning, everybody. Sorry, my sound went a little bit funny there. Hopefully you can all hear me. Welcome to this Thursday morning webinar series. I am Tori Tetro, coaching lead here with Ready Care. For this morning, we're going to look at the wild and wonderful world of gut health, what it is and why it matters. So throughout the webinar, we're basically going to break down what gut health, it's a term that we hear an awful lot, what it actually means, what's involved in gut health, what are we actually speaking about when we mention that, what do the bacteria in the gut do, and what's the link between the brain and the gut, and why that matters. So we're going to look at things like immune regulation, mental health, inflammation, even metabolic function. So metabolic function being how that can affect our weight, our blood sugars, and all of that lovely system involved. So hopefully by the end of today, we'll have covered what the gut microbiome is, why it matters primarily, how it influences our mood, our immune function and metabolism. So we're going to really have a look at the ins and outs of the mood and particularly the leaky gut aspect of things. If any questions come up for you guys at any point throughout the webinar, as usual, you can just pop them into the comment section. We'll have a quick look at how processed foods in particular, sugar and carbohydrates, damage the gut function and how that can impact your overall health. And I'll give you some practical evidence-based strategies to support a healthy microbiome. So what is the gut microbiome? Where's my little slide? There we go. So what is the gut microbiome? So the gut microbiome refers to 100 trillion, which I cannot wrap my head around, 100 trillion microbes living in our digestive tract. You just have to imagine how absolutely dinky and tiny they are. It starts to make me think about the universe and whether we're tiny microbes on somebody else's digestive tract. But these microbes aren't just passengers, right? They perform essential functions that impact our entire body. The key functions of the microbiome, so digestion and nutrient absorption. Microbiome break down fiber into what's known as short chain fatty acids, which sometimes, if you're reading about the gut, can be acronymed to SCFAs. So SCFAs, they fuel the gut cells and support metabolic health. So if you want to start to think of your gut bacteria like these tiny little trillions of tiny chefs, it'd be like some bizarre children's cartoon that transforms fiber into useful nutrients that keep your gut lining healthy and help to regulate your metabolism. So it helps towards immune system regulation. So 70 to 80% of the immune system resides in the gut. So a healthy microbiome by default helps to train immune cells and prevents autoimmune conditions, autoimmune diseases. So your gut bacteria, as well as being little chefs, are like little security guards that help your immune system decide what's a real threat and what's harmless, which reduces your systems, your overall system, unnecessary inflammation. And we'll look at that in a little bit more detail in a while when I talk about leaky gut, which is just as delicious as it sounds. And mental health, which we'll go into more detail in a while. So the gut produces 90% of the body's serotonin. So serotonin is a neurotransmitter linked to mood, sleep, and balancing anxiety. So your gut and your brain are constantly in communication with each other through the nervous system and chemicals like serotonin. That's why gut health affects your mood. And it's one of the things that when participants begin a low carb protocol and low carb program, they start to see, I often ask, the usual questions, how's your digestion, your energy and all that. But one of the things that most participants will notice is actually they're a lot calmer than they used to be. Their mood is much more regulated than it might previously have been. So that's one of the lovely positive side effects of looking after the gut. And of course there's the inflammation control. So that would be that chronic inflammation that we spoke about is a major driver of diseases like diabetes, obesity and heart disease. So the gut health keeps inflammation in check, much like how good brakes would prevent a car from overheating. So your gut bacteria really influences far more than just your digestion. They play a role in immune defense, mental well-being, and metabolic function. So into the more nitty-gritty aspect of things, which we just covered. So the gut-brain axis, I'll get my slides correct one week, lads, but today's not the day. So the gut-brain are connected through what's known as the vagus nerve, not like Las Vegas, F-A-G-U-S nerve. And it's a communication highway that allows gut bacteria to influence neurotransmitter production. So 90% of your serotonin, as we mentioned a while ago, is produced there. So that's the neurotransmitter that's regulating mood, sleep, and anxiety, or lack thereof. So gut bacteria also influences dopamine, which impacts motivation and pleasure. And for those of you that are regular watchers, I bang on about dopamine constantly because it's essentially the neurotransmitter that gets us from here to there. It's the one that helps with task beginning, task completion, starting new projects, most importantly, finishing new projects, and just the ability to get things done, for want of a better word. So the gut also influences dopamine. And for those of us, I say us, that have conditions like ADHD, the serotonin and dopamine levels are much, much lower. So making sure that your gut health is up to par is really, really, really important as a preventative measure and as a management tool in helping with your serotonin and dopamine production. So with that, a low diversity microbiome. So that is a microbiome that doesn't have a lot of different strands of bacteria because there's so many out there. It's associated with higher rates of depression, anxiety, and cognitive decline. So study found that individuals with major depression had distinct gut imbalances, particularly low levels of anti-inflammatory bacteria. So your gut health directly affects how you feel emotionally. If your microbiome is unbalanced, your mood and your mental well-being can suffer an awful lot. And I think with this of and I've been this person and I've met and know lots of these people, but I have been this person, younger people in the 16 to 25 bracket that have an absolutely atrocious diet. I know when I was that age, before I got into all this, I used to survive off toast, sweet tea, and Coca noodles, which is just a trifecta of the worst things possible that anybody can ever survive on, and had chronic anxiety. So bad, it was crippling. And when I began drastically changing my lifestyle habits, that was one of the marked improvements that I saw, as anxiety really went down. Now, of course, I still get anxious about, if there's stressful things happening out in the world, but really, really not to the level that it would have been. So just if you or somebody in your life suffers from anxiety and low moods, something to keep in mind: the gut will directly produce more of the things that can actively help towards it. So it's very, very important to pick the specific foods that are going to feed the microbiome, which I'll touch on in a while. So I wanted to chat a bit about gut health and leaky gut syndrome. So leaky gut refers to increased intestinal permeability, things going through that shouldn't get through your gut wall. Where the gut lining becomes weakened, this allows toxins and undigested food particles and harmful bacteria to leak into the bloodstream, because really the gut wall is the physical line of defense that stops undigested foods, that stops anything that shouldn't go through into the bloodstream to kind of go through the digestive passages. So when there's a permeability in there, when the foundations of that gut wall start to degrade a little bit, what happens is a condition known as leaky gut. And that will start to allow all types of nuisances to your system into the bloodstream that really and truly shouldn't be there. So what causes it? High sugar, high carb diets. Yes, I had leaky gut when I was surviving off those terrible foods. And chronic inflammation caused by processed foods, artificial sweeteners, and additives that will disrupt your gut bacteria. So processed foods bring up your inflammation. The inflammation will then eat into the permeability of what am I trying to say? Not the permeability, the opposite will basically eat into the strength and fortification of that gut wall, the way that it should be functioning. Artificial sweeteners and additives disrupt your gut bacteria. So when you have a surplus of quote unquote bad bacteria in there, it starts to affect that gut wall again. Stress and lack of sleep, which increase gut permeability. So health consequences of this leaky gut: autoimmune diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, Hashimoto's, thyroid disease. What I was struggling with at the time was fibromyalgia, which was brought on by massive systemic inflammation in the body. So anywhere that there's high inflammation, it brings up the likelihood of autoimmune type diseases. Chronic fatigue, brain fog then being not really being able to think very well, thinking very slowly, memory being affected, cognitive processing being affected. For want of a better word, it's almost like you've had a very, very bad night's sleep, whatever the amount of sleep that you've had. It's almost like you have a wet towel on your head that you're trying to think through. That's the what brain fog kind of feels like, if you're wondering on that. So, and food intolerances and bloating. So bloating is a huge indicator that there is something not quite right with your gut. Little bits of bloating are very normal after particular foods, especially if you've eaten quite a volume of it. But if you suffer from frequent, persistent bloating, there is something not quite right happening in the gut. Metabolic disorders then can be one of the other consequences, like insulin resistance. So if your gut lining is weak, toxins and bacteria can leak into your body, become part of the bloodstream, and that triggers an immune reaction. So all the little sirens will go off because your system and your immune system will realize that there's invaders in the bloodstream that shouldn't be there. So it's going to try to combat those. And that is a very simplified process as to how some autoimmune, self-immune, your immune system can basically start to attack itself. So there's really fairly heavy consequences to gut health not being in the best way that it can be. If it is weak, the toxins and bacteria can leak into your body, which triggers that autoimmune reaction, inflammation, and overall poor health. So focusing on our bodies, not quite with regards the high carb and processed food damage to gut health. So I'm picking on the sugars and processed carbs for a reason, and I always give myself as the example of I've done exactly that. I can tell you what are the consequences of it, which is like one of those reformed smokers. So the impact of sugar and processed carbs on the microbiome is basically feeding harmful gut bacteria, which reduces your microbial diversity, which is a basic way, or a fancy way of just basically saying it feeds bad bacteria. That bad bacteria, if you think of them as like turf wars, there's all these different strands of bacteria, and they're constantly fighting with each other. It's like we could probably make a very good series about this, a la Game of Thrones, but they're all good bacteria. But basically, the bad bacteria and harmful to your health bacteria will start to overtake the good ones that are helping with your immune system and helping with your gut-brain nexus, helping with your moods, sleep, and all of the lovely stuff. So processed carbohydrates also cause blood sugar spikes, and that increases inflammation and gut permeability. So you have a twofold effect there, where not only is it feeding, you are what you eat. Bad food equals bad bacteria thriving. So they're going to thrive at the same time that blood sugar spike is causing an increase in inflammation. So you have a two-way effect where there's more of the bad army happening, and they now have a permeability in the fortress of your gut. So it's not spelling very, very good things for your system as a whole. So diets high in refined grains and sugars are linked to higher rates of anxiety, depression due to the gut imbalances, as well as a host of inflammatory conditions that go along with that. So how can low carb diets improve gut health, which should feel kind of self-explanatory if you just reverse what I've just said. So essentially, it encourages beneficial bacteria. Low carb diets with fiber from non-starchy vegetables support your short chain fatty acid production, reducing your inflammation. So people often think, oh, I'm going to have porridge and cereals for my fiber, but lots of different foods have fiber that don't also contain high levels of carbohydrates and glucose. Things like all above ground veg, particularly green leafy veg, things like leeks, things like courgettes, bok choy, salads, any above ground vegetables, you get the idea. They all have a huge amount of fibers. So do things like berries, so do things like seeds, chia seeds, flax seeds, nuts. They all have huge amounts of fiber. So you do not need to, because most people are doing it with the best of intentions, that they go, look, I know that fiber is good for the system. I'm going to go to the package that says high in fiber, and in very tiny writing, very high in everything else that's not good for you. No, they never put that on the packaging. But there are lots of other sources of fiber that will help to feed the good bacteria in your gut and support that short chain fatty acid production. So low carb diets also reduce bloating and digestive issues. It is the first thing that people notice. Even before I ask them, they'll say to me, my pants are feeling they're fitting me much better, and I'm noticing I'm way less bloated than I was. Essentially, many people with IBS and SIBO experience fewer symptoms on a lower carb diet. And I would even hazard to say that a lot of people that have insulin resistance difficulties with foods might have somewhat of a misdiagnosis with IBS that really is down to their body's ability to break down processed foods that is actively harming their gut, harming their entire system. So reduce bloating and reduce digestive issues. It restores gut lining integrity. The opposite. We have a fortification in the wall of I'm so bad with historical references, the fortress. Cutting sugar and processed food essentially is going to allow the gut barrier to heal, improving immune function. So rather than have things constantly go through and your immune system going, we need to get rid of these, this is bad, attack, and essentially all you're attacking is yourself. There's a huge reduction in foods and toxins that should never have made it through the gut wall being in the system. So there's a repairing happening. There's a lower inflammation. The inflammation eats away at the gut wall. If there is a lower risk of inflammation, the gut wall and the body will start to do what it do best, which is heal itself to the best of its ability. So too many processed carbs essentially damage your gut bacteria, increase inflammation, and while a fiber-rich low carb diet helps to restore balance and repair gut function. So what are some of the ways, sorry, I didn't realize I didn't have my slide up there. What are some of the ways that you can help this? So eat more prebiotics. Prebiotics are gut bacteria's food. It's what they love to eat. I mentioned some of them there. Asparagus, onions, garlics, leeks, flax seeds, all fantastic prebiotics. You can get a full list of those online, but just as what's available in your kitchen, a lot of the above ground vegetables are fantastic prebiotics. Prebiotics help good bacteria to thrive and improve that gut barrier integrity. Incorporate fermented foods. Now, I would say with the caveat of this is not for everybody. And you'll know whether you're a candidate for those fairly quickly. If you're somebody that has high levels of histamine, so if you're somebody that suffers quite frequently with histamine overproduction, I would say ease yourself into the fermented foods, because sometimes they can aggravate that a little bit. Now, it's not that they're to avoid altogether, because they're wonderful for your gut bacteria, but the body's never as simple as what's good for the goose and good for the gander. Sometimes if you have very high histamine production levels, I would just say mind yourself with the fermented foods. For anybody else, anyone that doesn't suffer from high histamine levels, they're brilliant. So live yogurts, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha, whichever way you like to say that. Any of the fermented foods are absolutely fantastic for gut bacteria. Reduce your sugar and processed foods, which I hope you'll have understood is kind of my main point. So high sugar diets really are going to play havoc with your gut bacteria. It will feed your harmful bacteria. It will lead to inflammation and poor gut function. So what are highly processed foods, just in case? So the opposite of something that's a single ingredient food. So if you look at the back of a packet, usually if it's in a packet in the first place, it's likely that it's a processed food, but something that has more than a few ingredients. If you have more than 10 on a list, it's usually a processed food. Processed foods will have ingredients that you struggle to pronounce, things that definitely are synthesized in a lab, things that are additives to give it a longer shelf life, a lot of products that are microwavable, a lot of products like pizzas, frozen pizzas, things that basically have loads of ingredients are usually fairly processed. The closest it is to its natural form, the closest it is to the way that you would find it, quote unquote, in the wild, a head of lettuce is a head of lettuce. But if you had a pasta sauce that had onions, tomato, garlic, there's nothing wrong with that. They are all ingredients in their true form, in their whole food form. Processed foods then is the opposite, and things that are colors that they should never be. I mean, if you have any neon colored food, I mean, you can be fairly certain that it's a very highly processed foods. So anything like that is best to avoid altogether. Managing your stress and sleep. Now, this we didn't get a chance to touch on hugely in this talk, but essentially chronic stress will increase your cortisol, and that also weakens your gut lining. So if you're in a very stressful job environment where that's more difficult to control, if you're in the process of moving house and it's taking a year and a half and the builders are all over the place and it's adding to the bill, you are in a context and environment where stress is difficult to control. Now, it's always better to do your best with it, but if you are in a period of time where you know that your stress levels are going to be high, I would say it's extra important for you to counterbalance with as best a diet as you can. And sometimes that's difficult because usually the more stressed we are, the more we want simple processed foods. But actually, if you know that you're in a stressful environment or an environment for a period of time where your sleep is going to be affected fairly badly, counteract as best you can with whole foods. It's going to be a really protective way to look after your gut health. So final thoughts on it, and reiterating what I've said, but just to, she's very happy there in her field. She's got great gut health. She's so happy. Eat prebiotic and probiotic rich foods, things like garlic, above ground vegetables, some fermented foods, reduce processed foods and sugars. These feed harmful bacteria, which are looking to do you no good whatsoever. Prioritize fiber from non-starchy vegetables and things like berries, nuts, and seeds to support beneficial bacteria. Manage your stress as best you can. Remember, your gut and brain are interconnected. So your gut is the foundation of your health. Take care of it, and it will take care of you. So any questions, guys, please pop them in the comment section. I always do my best to pack as much as I can in the amount of time that I have, but I do realize sometimes I am speaking like an auctioneer. So thank you for those that stayed as long as you did, and have a lovely rest of your day. I'll be back with you next week to focus on protein. So what is protein and why is it important? Right, I think that's me for today. No questions seem to be popping in. So have a lovely rest of your day. And for those watching back, you also have a lovely rest of your day. And we'll talk to you next week. Bye now.